Welcome to Grab a Coffee with Cubesys. I'm your host, Chris Hales. In this series of 4, we've got some topics that are going to help ISVs with their adoption of cloud environments. We're also going to talk about some automation and scalability. We're going to talk about operations and management, and we're also going to talk about that all-important optimization of your environment. Coming up, we've got an interview, and then shortly after, we're going to have a presentation about what that interview covered for today. So stick around, stick with us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hi everyone, let me steal 2 minutes of your time to tell you about Cubesys and who we are. Cubesys are a Microsoft partner and have been for over 8 years. We specialise in 2 pillars within the Microsoft ecosystem: M365 with Windows 10 management, security and identity services, and Azure platform. So we help organisations of all steps and sizes adopt the Azure platform and get the best out of it. In the world of ISVs, and we're an ISV ourselves, we bring the product so we understand your pain points and how to work. We help small ISVs adopt cloud by getting governance in place and start to understand the platform and get the best out of it. Our larger ISV clients often use us as a point of reference, again, so that they can focus on their product and what they're good at, while we provide platform expertise and allow them to achieve their goals through the right adoption of cloud services.
Good morning everyone, and welcome to today's session for Cloud Adoption with ISVs. I'm joined today by Paul and Sylvan from Cubesys. Hi guys, how about you give us a quick introduction?
Thanks Chris, and morning everybody. I'm Paul Heaton. I've got my coffee ready for the session. I'm co-founder and CEO at Cubesys.
Hi guys, my name is Sylvan Matter and I'm co-founder and CTO at Cubesys. Drinking coffee all day, usually.
Thanks guys. So like I said, today's topic is about cloud adoption for today's ISVs. So my first question to you guys would be what does cloud adoption mean to Cubesys?
Why don't I grab that one and go first? Cloud adoption for me is really, really exciting. If I look back at my 20 years in IT, mainly focused on infrastructure and enabling the business to bring workloads and applications to our end users and clients, I've spent a lot of time saying no and pushing back on business and slowing them down, mainly for things like capacity and compliance and thinking about that high availability and structure that we have to put in. And it's been hard work in the past. When I look at cloud adoption, now in today's world, it means that we can say yes to the business. So I think that's really exciting. But when we say yes, we have to do that with an appropriate amount of governance. We have to think about what our operational responsibility is now going forward. It needs a bit of a mindset change for us, right, as IT. And we also need to focus on how we give visibility and make sure we've got that regular cadence in our operational approach. So what I think is really exciting is the speed which we can move at, but we've got to move at that speed with some guardrails in place, and we're going to talk today about how we achieve some of those guardrails.
Thanks for that, Paul. My next question, you touched on cloud governance. Can you give me an example of what is poor governance and what is good governance?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, for me, I've got quite a strong opinion about that, having spent the last 5 or 6 years helping lots of different organisations of different sizes and shapes, from government departments to small ISVs and large ISVs, take on the cloud adoption. I think it's really, really important, that governance piece, that we get it in place first. So where I've seen problems is when the organisations have started building those workloads in Azure and haven't got an understanding or haven't put in place governance and foundations. So good governance is when we've got that in place, that we give visibility through things like tagging, and that's something we'll talk about later on in the session. But we make sure we give visibility and we've got guardrails in place around security and access and all those things. So that bad governance is when we don't do it at the beginning, right? So if we rush in and we have to then retrofit things, then that's a really poor, bad thing.
Yeah, just one quick real-world example, right? So for example, it's really, really easy to deploy a workload in the wrong region, right? And refactoring that can be quite time-consuming. So putting those guardrails in place and using something like policies to prevent those human errors at the start is very valuable.
Yeah, I can think of at least one client where that got out of control and they were in multiple regions, and when we looked to bring them back to Australia, it was just cost prohibitive, right, to do that, because it's too much work. So get the governance in place first. That's the message.
Well, excellent. So another question I had was cloud operating responsibilities. You mentioned this earlier, but what does that mean, and how is it relevant for ISVs?
Yeah, if you look, for example, shifting from on-prem to cloud, right? With that shift, the responsibilities shift as well. Just one small example, in cloud, we're not responsible for hardware anymore, right? We have that layer of abstraction, and we definitely go up the stack. We build on a secure platform by default, but what we're deploying and the workloads we're deploying, we're responsible for those, and we're responsible for things like security, scalability, availability, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's paramount that we plan and make sure that we plan for our workloads and our deployments.
Our responsibility matrix is different now, right? So when we adopt cloud, it means that we're responsible for a different set of actions in that cloud, right? So we haven't removed them, but they've changed slightly, right? So things like that high availability and ability to govern in cloud and see costs. So of course we're changing to a consumption-based model, so cost becomes very much paramount. It's not that once a year capex type approach. We need to be on it every day, and we need to raise the visibility. So our responsibility matrix operationally changes.
Okay, and when we talk about the operational mindset, what does that mean? And also, how is that working for ISVs and through their cloud adoption? You know, how can ISVs change their mindset when it comes to working with cloud?
Yeah, maybe I can make an example for how that has changed for us. Being an ISV and developing software, I guess if we bring those operating models from on-prem to the cloud, then it's very hard to succeed. And I think there's a lot of things we can unlock if we move to things like a DevOps mindset, and we use infrastructure as code and configuration as code. We automate our deployments with CI/CD pipelines and things like that. And there's a lot of benefits in doing so. Yeah. For example, think about change control, right? Change control doesn't go away if you use cloud, but you can be smart how you do that. Yeah. If we tested a deployment in UAT, for example, pushing that in production gets so much easier because we have the confidence that it works. Yeah. It's fully automated, and we can rely on our.
It's certainly impacted us. So as somebody mentioned, we are an ISV ourselves. We have a product that's in the Azure marketplace called Cloud Clarity. But internally, as we develop that, using the Azure DevOps toolset in conjunction with the Azure platform has been really powerful, right? And it's certainly all that automation and the way that we tackle things has changed considerably. And that did need a change in mindset, right, from us.
Okay. One other thing you mentioned earlier was visibility. How can ISVs create visibility, and why is it so important for them to have visibility as they adopt the cloud?
Maybe I'll start by saying why I think it's important, but you can then maybe talk a little bit what we've done with Cloud Clarity and why
yeah,
or how
absolutely.
we achieve that. But visibility, I think, is key to success in cloud. We already talked about how we're moving to that consumption-based model, right? And that means that we need to be absolutely in control of cost, but it's true for security and lifecycle management of resources and things. And I think it's really important that everybody in the organization gets that visibility. We want the CFOs, we want the accounts team, we want the product owners, and we want the developers and engineers to have that visibility and know what they're spending, what they've got deployed, and where they are in that life cycle of those resources, right? And I think it's important that visibility is across the organization.
Yeah, for example, tax is one good way of getting that visibility and categorizing your resources in a logical way, right? So we have that hierarchical structure of resources in Azure, but sometimes we just want to put a different lens on our resources, and through tax we can do that. So having a standard for that and having that mapped out will help you to gain visibility and to manage your and control your environment going forward.
Yeah. And look, the guys, that's also a really important point with that is it's not a point in time exercise. This is a cadence that you need to have within your organization. So all these things we've talked about with the governance and how we have this operational change and responsibility, our mindset, the visibility we give, this has to become part of what you do day to day. It's certainly not point in time. And I think when I look back to how we used to work on-prem, it seemed more sort of point in time throughout the year, maybe the annual or sort of monthly cycles. What we want to do with cloud is make sure that we're doing that like almost daily, right? And have our hand on
exactly.
Finger on the
and
pulse.
what you said at the beginning was like you need that in place to start, right? But don't be scared by that. Like having something minimum viable to get you started is definitely a good idea, and then you can expand
it's a good point.
expand on that as you go.
governance isn't something that you achieve overnight. It isn't something that you just sort of tick a box and move on. It is part of what you do, and it will definitely develop and grow as you develop and grow. If I look at Azure and think of there's now hundreds of policies right in the policy engine, and you don't turn them all on straight away, right? And you need to get that minimum viable product and then grow with your knowledge and capability within the platform. Right?
Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been really informative. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully we get to have you join some of our sessions in future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So we've had our interview and we've had a bit of a discussion around cloud adoption for ISVs, and now we want to have a conversation and a bit of a presentation around going a little bit deeper and diving a little bit deeper into those areas and those 4 key areas that were kind of raised and discussed throughout that interview. So thanks for sticking around with us. What I'll do is I'll kick off straight away and with a quick recap. So the recap of the interview was that there was kind of 4 key areas that we found, right? So there was cloud governance and understanding how cloud governance is important to you as an ISV and how it's important to have good governance, and there's also examples of poor governance. We also had a quick conversation around the operating responsibilities, about how we change and shift our responsibilities from on-prem and to cloud, and what that means for our team's responsibilities. We also talked about the operating mindset, and we talked about how operating in a different way has to happen as we adopt cloud, whether that's through continual improvement and continual development, or whether it's implementing a change control process that works with cloud and understanding what mindset changes need to occur internally for that to be possible. So governance. Now, governance can be a really big topic, so I won't go into too much detail around that one, but the example that Paul and Sylvan gave us was that there was a specific customer that had a governance in place but didn't have the right level of governance in place. Now, what happened, they were able to deploy resources in Australia East, but also in America and in Brazil and in South Africa. So doing that creates a problem where we have a resource that might cost us $2.80 here, might cost us $5.80 there. And all of a sudden we've got this bill shock of, well, why is this resource costing me different? And it's because that governance wasn't in place to keep those guardrails in place, to stop them from being able to deploy those resources in those other regions where they may not want to have their resources deployed to. So governance and cadence around that is all so important when we're looking at adopting our cloud environment. It's also really key when we're thinking about our compliance requirements, our security requirements, and how we can automate and effectively deploy that consistently across our entire cloud adoption. So it's a big piece to kind of go through. I think what you should potentially look at is have a look at the cloud adoption framework. Now, the cloud adoption framework from Microsoft for Azure, now behind me, just here, down here, and you will get a copy of these presentations afterwards, but there's a little link to say go to aka.ms/CAF, which is where you'll find a plethora of information around the cloud adoption framework. But I'm going to try and give you a succinct high-level version of it. But essentially what we need to do is we need to start with our strategy. We need to define our cloud adoption strategy. And that starts by understanding why we need to do it. There might be a business requirement to do it. There might be business outcomes that we can't achieve in our on-prem environment. Therefore, we need to consider cloud adoption to meet those needs. We might need to think about a priority project that all of a sudden we don't have the infrastructure to deliver it. So we need to look at cloud adoption to empower us to be able to do that. We might also look at business justification. It might be a cost advantage to go to cloud. So we need to consider all these things apart as we define our strategy for our cloud adoption. Then we move into the planning phase. In the planning phase, we're looking at the digital estate. So the digital estate is, what are we going to actually use? What are we going to consume and why? We're also going to think about our alignment of our organization around, so are these people the right people to manage this part? And this part can be managed by these people. And can they do this part? So having that understanding of how and why and where I'm going to use my cloud environment for my business needs. Now, the skills readiness planning is all about understanding where my skill gaps are. So if I have an internal team and I've got shortages in certain specific areas of skill that relate to the platform I'm trying to deploy, then I need to address that. I need to understand, well, where do I go? How do I get there? And what training do I need to provide those team members? Or do I need to outsource that? Do I need to find a vendor or a partner, a Microsoft partner like Cubesys, who can come in and help me provide that service? Then we look at the ready stage, and we talk about, okay, cool, we've gone through our setup guide and we're all aligned. And then we might think about landing zones. Now, landing zones and the blueprints, I could spend a day talking about this, but I won't. What I'll do is I'll frame it in a simple way. It's essentially a repeatable process. A blueprint is essentially a copy or a template of a repeatable landing zone, and a landing zone is defined as the infrastructure you need to deploy your platform or your product or your service. So if your landing zone includes identity, network, it might include specific governance policies, it might include certain regions and other requirements or regulations that you want to enforce on that particular landing environment. Now, a blueprint is simply a copy of that, and it's simply an ability to take that particular configuration and then go and put it somewhere else and do that in a consistent manner. So blueprints are a way of automating it and helping us to expand on our adoption. Then we look at the adoption side of it. And by the way, you always want to do best practice validation. I forgot the point. You've always got to do best practice validation. It's very important to understand that what you're doing meets the standard that's out there, but also understanding that if you don't, you might not be able to claim against SLAs. So it's important to kind of remember that you've got to be in a form of, how do I put it, productionized readiness and design appropriate, kind of designing appropriately for cloud. So then in the adoption phase, we want to think about, what's that first workload? Do I adopt and migrate my test environment first, my dev environment first? Or do I just, want to throw the cowboy boots on and go yeehaw and do production straight away? We also want to look at those expanded scenarios around, okay, well, what do we need to think about from a resource perspective from DR and things like that. We also, again, want to look at that process improvement and that the best practice validation. But our business improvements process improvements might need to consider things like the operational mindset and how we achieve those operational improvements. We also want to make sure that throughout our entire time of cloud adoption, that we're looking at the governance of it, and we're looking at understanding that as we shift and change, so we might have our platform and our product and it's good to go, it's ready to go, and it's been in production for years and it's doing really well. Now, as we take on a new product or we evolve the product, what happens to our governance? We need to make sure our governance is kept up to date and it's relevant. We've got to keep it relevant to what we're doing. So governance can be this piece that we implement all of these different policies that don't mean a lot, or we can focus on those policies and have a better understanding of what's relevant to us, what's relevant to our product, and what's relevant to what we're trying to achieve. And then also you want to look at the management side of it and understand, okay, what's my operational baseline? Am I comfortable with that infrastructure as a service VM running at 90% CPU utilization the whole day? All right, is that my baseline? And getting an understanding of those baselines is important because you want to make sure that you're meeting those kind of minimums, and having an understanding of that. And it also helps you to, form some internal SLAs around, well, that's what the environment does, or your application is potentially causing this problem, or, and it can be a lot of that. But at the same time, it's also about understanding that if we don't have those baselines, then we don't know how we've improved it, and we don't know how we've scaled it correctly. Now, the operating responsibilities in cloud. Now, I sometimes say yes, sometimes say no to agreeing on some of these slides, but everybody agrees that when it's on-prem, you are responsible for it. It is your responsibility as an IT team, as an IT professional, to be looking after all of these areas. Now, you might not look into every one of them, but your IT team is responsible for potentially making sure that all of this is in under control and within budget and all these other things. But as we shift into the cloud and as we adopt our cloud, those responsibilities shift. And we need to be mindful of this because it's also about understanding that, an infrastructure engineer, when we look at infrastructure as a service, they don't have to manage and monitor the tin. So the tin being the storage, the network, and the actual physical virtual machines, right? Or they're not the virtual machines, but the server that runs on. But we might have to look after everything else. So as it says here, so the operating system and above. So the apps, the connectivity to a degree, because if it's defined and configured inside the operating system, the data and the application. And then when we look at platform as a service, and platform as a service, a good example of that is an Azure website, an Azure web app. And the web app is essentially a Windows web server, which is running IIS, for example. It might have .NET pre-installed, and everything from that layer down is managed by Microsoft. And then your responsibility is to make sure you've got the data and the application and the code, right, to deploy that Azure web service. So you can see that those responsibilities shift. So, for example, in a platform as a service, you might not need an infrastructure engineer, but you might need a DevOps engineer or a developer for the web front end. So they might work together. And then in a software as a service offering, and we all know what they're like. They're the Office 365s, the SAPs. It's all about consumption of service. So it's all about understanding that I no longer have to take care of. When we'll use Office 365 as an example with Exchange. So with Exchange and the Office 365, then we no longer need to manage the Exchange server and how it's linked into Active Directory. We need to make sure our directory is a part of it, but we don't necessarily need to manage the Exchange server that's managing the process or the hub transports and so on and so forth. So all of that responsibility lies to Microsoft. So it's important to understand how these responsibilities shift and how those responsibilities interact with your internal teams. Now, the cloud operating mindset. The cloud operating mindset, in my opinion, is one of the things that people don't always understand. Now, I've made a high-level understanding of it here for you. Now, if there's any developers in the room, they're going to be very excited by the image at the very top here. But essentially, it is the DevOps, right? The continual improvement and the continual development, and how that feedback loop happens. So, the way I've always looked at this is it always starts with a business need or a business requirement. And then you might have that business need met with an architect. So an architect might go, okay, cool, well, this platform or this infrastructure as a service offering would be perfect for that product or that requirement. And then they might consider an infrastructure as code deployment, right? So they might then take the landing zone, for example, and deploy it in code. So then you can use something like Azure DevOps and a pipeline to deploy it, right? To make that consistency when we actually do it. Then we might deploy the environment using, for example, the Azure DevOps pipeline. And then we want to operationalize it. Now, when I say operationalize, I think about testing. I think about, okay, I've deployed the environment now, and I need to rationalize it. I need to make sure it's all working. So I need to get tested. And whether that's having business users, whether that's having a platform owner, there's a few different ways you can do that. But I think from my perspective and the ease of kind of understanding how this process works for some people that aren't too DevOps-y focused, would be to deploy a system and have people testing it and having the integrations tested. And once they've got those testings, they might find something broken, or they might find something that could be optimized. So what they might do is have those operational improvements. They'll feed them back. Now, they can either feed them back to the architect, who might then go back and through the process again, and he might make modifications to his infrastructure as code or his config as code. He might then go through the process of deploying it again and then retesting it. Or it might be the fact that that person has the rights and responsibility to update the code themselves. So as they find those operational improvements, they update their infrastructure as code and then go through the process again, redeploy it. And then we're ready for production. So when we're ready for production, that's it. We've hit that big button, and we're hit the big green button, we go, and we've got all our live users ready to roll, right? So it's about making sure that we follow a process like this, no matter what it is, whether it's network, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's firewall and security, whether it's identity. There are ways of doing infrastructure or configuration as code in almost every platform, and it's really important to maximize utilization of that. And for why? Well, next clinic, we're going to start talking about some of those things. The other thing they covered in the interview today was visibility and why it's important to have visibility when we're adopting our cloud. Now, in my opinion, visibility is almost crucial to any cloud deployment, because what are the two things that every cloud deployment needs? Well, a change in mindset's one of them. Another one of them is an understanding of the cost, and cost is a huge piece of cloud, because we're all used to on-prem environments. We're all used to going, right, cool, that piece of hardware's been there for 5 years. It's time to change it. It's end of life. Right, cool, go and buy another one, and then chop and change. But when we come into cloud, we have to change our mindset and our thinking, and we need that visibility of what our costs are. Because it's easy to get a cost from an on-prem environment. You go to a vendor, you knock on Mr. Dell's door, and you go, Mr. Dell, I need this many servers, I need this much storage, I need this much network, I need this much everything. And they go, sure, customer, I'll write you a quote. And they hand you a quote. But in the cloud, it's consumption model. So it's all about what am I consuming, and how much is that consumption costing me? So that CapEx to OpEx model is one part of that visibility, but creating visibility in an OpEx model is really important. And I think it's also something that's not necessarily done very well in some of cloud adoptions that I've seen, but it can be done very, very well if you've got the right kind of framework and the right kind of, I want to use the word tag here, and I want to touch on something here, because tags are very important when it comes to creating visibility in a cost model. And I'm not going to talk too far about that, because one of the things we're going to talk about in some of our later clinics is about our product called Cloud Clarity, which is a product that's been created by Cubesys. So we're an ISV, so we understand what it is to be an ISV. And what we've done is developed a product called Cloud Clarity, which you can consume straight from Azure Marketplace. And it utilizes tags to create visibility and functionality for that cost management platform inside Azure. So I won't touch too much further on that one, but the other side of this is also visibility in your security stance and in your policy management. That's really important to make sure that you're compliant, that you're meeting those needs, and you're meeting those regulatory requirements that are going to ever so change and shift as you deploy more or as you change your adoption. So creating that visibility is really key to bringing that to the forefront and bringing that information to be consumable, to be easy to manage and easy to update. So visibility is really important around that. It's also about creating the right visibility for the right people. And that's another key piece, is you don't need, an infrastructure engineer doesn't necessarily need to understand the cost management side of it, potentially, depending on who you are. But a finance manager, well, they want to see the cost of everything. But your infrastructure manager, well, he's only concerned about his budget line, so he only wants to see his budget and his cost center or his area of responsibility. So creating visibility to the right people is also really good. Kind of like having a security person. Now, security people, they always want to have that visibility of what are they doing wrong, where are they compliant, where are they not compliant. So thinking about something like Secure Score in the Azure platform. Now, Secure Score will give you that visibility. It'll give you that understanding of, okay, cool, out of 100, where am I up to? So, and it gives that ease of visibility. So it's really important to create visibility when we look at cloud adoption, because it's going to give the right information to the right people. So, you've sat with this so far today. What I would like to do now is give you an opportunity to go and grab a coffee. So grab a coffee on us, fill out this form, and we'll definitely send you a coffee voucher from HeyU. And next time you're coming on to a coffee with Cubesys, you can definitely have your coffee ready to go. I know that I'm never far from mine. So these are the last little bits of pieces from our presentation today, but I guess what I wanted to do is highlight a couple of resources that were important to me when I actually was preparing today's presentation, and after having that interview with Paul and Sylvan earlier in the week, I kind of came across some understandings of, well, the cloud adoption framework is a really key piece of this, and the MS Learn is the learning platform from Microsoft, and it's got a really good module for the cloud adoption framework. So, because cloud adoption framework is not just about how much you know or if you know about cloud adoption framework, but it's about how to use it and how to maximize your use of it. And that MS Learn piece has a good way of helping you to understand how it can be applied to a specific scenario. And the DevOps Dojo. The Dojo is also about how that that operational mindset and that continual improvement and development has been used inside Microsoft, and how they've continued to evolve their CI/CD approach and process to meet what they're doing. So I think it's a really good read for anybody out there that doesn't know a lot about DevOps and doesn't have a full understanding of why it's important. I would really recommend you definitely read through that. And with that, guys, I think I'm going to say thank you for your time. I really appreciate you guys sticking it out for us, and hopefully we'll see you at the next Coffee with Cubesys.
Hi. If you're an ISV looking at migrating to Azure or already developing on that platform, come and talk to us. We support our ISV clients to be successful with their cloud adoption. We make sure that you can focus at what you're good at and help with things like cloud adoption, cloud governance, and cloud optimization. If that sounds interesting to you, please come and talk to us.